Wow. I'm just blown away by being here, and this is an incredible participation coming out to be here in person. It's really amazing. I am honored, I am humbled, and I'm just really happy to be here, so thank you. Just share, for those of you who don't know my work and much about our institute, I am in Connecticut, although I'm born and bred in the Midwest. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and thrilled to be back in the Midwest, so thank you, Wisconsin. Through our institute, if you don't know about our work, we do monthly newsletter, we do monthly webinars, and our goal is really to promote a paradigm shift. A lot of the stuff I talk about in my book, we talk about through our institute. So if this stuff gets you jazzed up, please sign up for through our institute, foodshare.org/institute to learn more. So, my book. This was really, a lot of people ask me, how long did it take to write your book? And I reflect on that and I think, well, the short answer is over 25 years. And I got serious about writing the book 3 years ago, and it was largely because I spent a lot of time throughout my career talking with families who struggle with food insecurity, hearing their stories, hearing their hopes and dreams for their families, their challenges. And I would visit a lot of food pantries and food banks around the country, and I would see really awesome, innovative things happening around the country, thinking, wow, we need to share these best practices. And at the same time, 2 weeks later or 2 blocks over, I would go to a program that looked kind of like it did back in 1994 when I got started in this work. And I thought, we need to share the innovation. We need to share the stories. And the goal of my book is bold yet simple. It's to reimagine and reinvent the way we think about this preventable problem of hunger in the United States of America. And most importantly, to spur action, to give you tangible, practical things that any one of us can do today, tomorrow, in our communities. And I'll tell you, so it's been a year now since the book was published, and I've had an opportunity to do a lot of virtual presentations. This is now my third in-person presentation, which is really thrilling. And I can tell you this paradigm shift is happening. There's so much change and progress happening, so it's really awesome, and I am looking forward to hearing your questions. I've got a bunch of information to share with you. I'm going to flip through a bunch of slides to hopefully give you some inspiration and ideas, and then we're going to have time for Q&A. So, and because we're live and we're here together in person, I'm also looking forward to some active participation, so be prepared. All right, you ready? Excellent. So I think a lot of the reason that we hold ourselves back from doing bigger and better work is because of the scarcity mentality. I write about this early in the book, and it makes sense when you think about people who are struggling to put meals on the table, right? It's a focus on lack, not having enough food, money, time, resources, etc. And if you're struggling with poverty, if you're struggling to balance paying for food, utility, medicine, housing, etc., it's very easy to understand the scarcity mentality. I think I think there was a session this morning about stress and trauma that goes in, like the psychosocial impact of living in poverty. We can recognize that in our programming. When we know that people are just trying to survive, then we can be empathetic to what that can look like and to put ourselves in their shoes. And it's our goal, hopefully, to help people move from that survival mode and that scarcity mentality towards stability and then being able to thrive. So that's at the individual level. But I would really encourage you all to think about, at your organizations, how much do we hold on to this scarcity mentality in our work and the way that we approach our programming and the work that we do? As nonprofits, historically, we are scratching together our budgets. We are trying our best to keep our lights on and pay the rent, pay the staff, etc. So it's easy to also get stuck in that mentality of, you know what, there's so many people in our community in need. We gotta just keep our heads down and just focus on moving food. So it's our challenge of how do we get out of that mindset, because that holds us back from future planning and other bigger strategic thinking, and most importantly, evaluating the work that we do. So how do we get out of this scarcity mentality? It's a focus on abundance, right? The opposite of scarcity, abundance. We can do this in a number of ways. We can focus on the strengths within ourselves, within the people who are coming to receive services, in our communities, and in our organizations. We can look at our assets, not just deficits, but think about what are the assets that we hold within our communities, within our staff, our organizations, and most importantly, of the people who are coming. They don't just have needs, they have assets that they can share. It's letting go of egos and competition. This is a really, really hard one. You think we're all in this to help people make sure they get enough food. How can we compete, have the same goal in mind? Yet we do, right? And you think as nonprofits, we're all in this for the shared benefit of our communities. It's hard though, right? Because there's often folks that are in our same communities, kind of in our turf, that we feel like, oh, if they get that grant funding, that's taking away from our opportunity to get that grant funding. If they get that recognition, it's taking away from the recognition that we might get. This happens a lot. And I think if we really want to strive to think bigger and better and think about abundance, we have to let go of that type of competition. Letting go of the ego. So what am I really good at? What is our organization best suited to do? And what are the things that, this isn't our strength, this isn't our lane. Who do we partner with that is probably better suited to do this other work? It's challenging, but really important. I love the notion that there are plenty of resources and good ideas to go around. So if there's somebody else who's in our space, who's in our community doing really, really similar work, sometimes it's easy to think, we're competing, we're the ones that are best to do this. Trust me, there's enough need and there's enough good resources to go around. And this is all about the theme for the conference here. It's reimagining resiliency, right? Thinking more abundantly about our work. I'm clicking. There it is. The way we define a problem helps to define our solution to that problem. So if we define the problem of hunger as a lack of food, makes a lot of sense, our solution becomes quite simple. We need to collect and distribute more food to more people. And in the most fundamental terms, that's a really easy way to think about food insecurity. There isn't enough food, people don't have enough food, we need to collect and distribute more. We as a nation, as a society, have done an extraordinarily good job of collecting and distributing billions of pounds of food to millions of Americans for decades. We do this really well, and the focus is on efficiency. We can feel really great about efficiently moving food to lots of people. But here's the challenge. Even though we've been doing this work really well for decades, we clearly haven't solved the problem. So what if, on the other hand, we define the problem of hunger as a much more complex issue that is rooted in stagnant wages that have in no way, shape, or form kept pace with inflation, with underemployment, with a lack of affordable housing in particular. Housing has skyrocketed. It is so hard to get shelter in any community in the United States. Lack of access to affordable, healthy, nutritious food. Lack of affordable transportation, health care, child care, all of the other core components of what it means to be able to make ends meet and to be stable and self-sufficient. And most importantly, hunger is rooted in systemic inequities, structural racism that make it much harder for certain groups of people, particularly BIPOC communities, to be able to have access to all of these other amenities, right? If we think about hunger as rooted in all of this, well, then our solution becomes much more complex. It becomes more holistic, and it has to be more coordinated. There's no way that we individually can solve all of these really hard systemic issues on our own. We need to partner with others. We need to think upstream and advocate for policy changes, for systems changes, because this is not just an individual's fault that they are not able to afford and access these other amenities. It's a systemic problem, right? So how do we advocate for upstream changes? We need new partners. We need to focus on healthy, nutritious food. If we're gonna solve these really complex problems, we best co-create these solutions with people who are living with food insecurity and have experienced hunger. They're the best ones to let us know how we can solve a problem that's gonna best meet their needs. And we need to evaluate what works. We need to be comfortable trying new things, piloting new programs, going out of a limb, trying things that are new, and probably failing. And trying things and finding out, you know what, that didn't work. If it doesn't work, let's stop doing it over and over again. Let's learn from that. Let's share those learnings and try something else. Because efficiency does not always mean effectiveness. Sometimes we need to slow down and do things in a different way to become more effective. So the key themes that I write about in my book, that we talk about through our institute, is that we are doing good work. And I don't mean that lightly or flippantly. All of you are on the front lines of doing this really good, important work. These last 2 years have been really, really hard as frontline essential workers. So I want to really say thank you genuinely from the bottom of my heart for all that you do tirelessly. There's a lot of people who talk about, the stress and the challenges of being on the front lines. So make sure you're taking care of yourselves. Make sure that you're patting yourselves on the back for this great hard work that you're doing. But we can do better. We can aim higher, and we can dream bigger about what we're doing in this work. We've been tackling hunger for decades, and we need to dream bigger about how we solve this preventable problem. And a lot of it is shifting our mentality from one of charity towards focusing on justice. Not focusing just on the metric of pounds of food, but we've got great tools now where we can measure the nutritional quality of that food. We need to stop thinking of this work as emergency services. When an emergency lasts for decades, that is not an emergency. Think about how often we describe our programs, our services as emergency programs, emergency food, emergency this, that, and the other. I think we're harming ourselves from this bigger work is when we think about an emergency. Some of the things that I've learned, I'll talk about language a little bit more, but while I'm speaking about emergency, not only is it just an inappropriate way to think about our decades-long approach to tackling food insecurity, but if you're on the cusp, if you're struggling on the borderline of food insecurity and poverty, and someone describes that they're providing emergency services, very often you won't think that that's for you, because you may not perceive that you're in an emergency state. There are other people who need this more than I do. This is for people who are truly in an emergency. I'm just having a hard time managing my bills every month. So when we talk about emergency, we may make it harder for people to receive our services. So let's focus more on empowerment and other resiliency thinking. And let's shift from pure transactional approaches of transactions of moving food towards building more relationships to ultimately transformations of lives and communities. This is really the paradigm shift that I'm talking about. It's about building the capacity of our food programs to more effectively address the root causes of why people are coming to our services in the first place and why they're struggling with poverty and food insecurity. Through our institute and in my book, I talk about the 3 C's. And I'll go into detail and give you some examples of each of these. But in a nutshell, it's creating a welcoming, dignified culture, allowing people to choose their food with dignity, and connection. Connection is one-on-one connections that we have with individuals when they come, that we can say, I see you, I'm making a connection, and also connecting with other community partners so that we can provide more wraparound services and not just food. Because it's my firm belief that even though we've been providing food effectively, efficiently for decades, it takes more than food to end hunger. So just some thought exercise for you. Think about some of your favorite places to shop, especially places that you go to shop for food, but other services. You know, what makes it a great experience? How do you feel when you go into that place to shop for food, to shop for clothing? What is it about it that creates a really nice experience? Think about times when you had to go receive services where it was really lousy service. What made it bad? What made it like really not a great experience where you wouldn't recommend going there, you really don't want to have to go back again? Think about that kind of experience when you think about your programs, your organizations. How does it feel when folks come to get service? What are the things that we might take away from this thought exercise and incorporate that into our work? So what creates that guest experience? It's multifaceted. It's a lot of different things. It's the facilities. How does it look and feel? Is it clean? Is it bright? Is it dingy? Is it dark? How long do you have to wait? Where are you waiting for services? Is it clear of what you need to do to navigate to get services, or is it complicated and confusing? Is there signage? Do you know where to go? Is it clear? Is it in the language that you speak and can understand? Are there people who greet you? Is there a human connection, or are you kind of wandering around like trying to figure it out? Is it dignified? What's the process? What's the intake process of how long, what kind of services you need? We're doing really good work, but especially with the guest experience, we can do better. Think about the language that we use to describe our work, and language is so powerful. Our words have meaning, they have power, and we need to choose them wisely. So much of the language when we talk about hunger and food insecurity, it's deficit-based, it's needs, it's people are struggling and this is really sad. How do we flip that around to more strength-based language? Let's highlight folks that received our services and are doing well. Let's share those stories and that messages. Think of the signage of when people come to your organization, your agency, to receive help. What is the language? What are the words? What's the signage like when you come in? The intake process, how much paperwork is required, how much intake, what does that look like, what is that messaging like? Having more person-centered language rather than feeding the hungry, feeding the needy. It's very othering. How do we put the person at the center of our language and our words? It's people, we're increasing access to people in our community. Feeding America, the national office, and a lot of groups are starting to refer to neighbors. And usually, like in my book and a lot of the work that I talk about, rather than describing clients, I will often say guests or customers, because I think it implies that customer service feel. And there's a woman in North Texas that describes why she uses the term neighbor, and she says, when you help your neighbor, you help your whole neighborhood. And when you bring your neighbor up, it raises your whole neighborhood up. It's not just for that individual, it's for everybody. I love that sense, right? So maybe thinking about helping our neighbor, helping our community, it can reduce the stigma. So many different ways to think about language on your website, in your newsletters, in your donor appeals. I would encourage you to critically think about the words that you use, the language that you use to describe your work, describe the work that you want to do. We're doing good work, but what do you think? We can do better. We can do better. In addition to thinking about who we're serving right now and the impact that we're having with our service now, I think it's really, really important to think about who we're not serving, who's not taking advantage of the services that we are offering. During COVID last spring, we did a statewide convenience sample of residents that live in Connecticut to understand the impact that COVID had on their food security status, if they were utilizing different services, and most importantly, if they weren't, why not? These are the top examples of why people did not choose to use a food pantry, the potential issues. The majority of folks, the number one response was that I don't want to rely on the food pantry because I want to support myself. You know, there's that like pride, I want to pick myself up by my own bootstraps, I don't want to have to rely on anyone else. A lot of logistical issues, worrying about having too many personal assets, not necessarily qualifying for help, not knowing when a food pantry is open. But almost half of people said they would feel embarrassed to use a food pantry. 40% said they worried others would find out if they were to use a food pantry. This is really telling, and I think it's important for us to pay attention to data like this. I can't imagine this is unique to Connecticut. I think you'd find some very similar responses if we polled folks here in Wisconsin. How do we use this to change the way that we provide our services? If we know that it's embarrassing and folks don't necessarily want to come because they don't know enough about our services or they would feel badly taking advantage of our services, how do we message our work differently? I'd love to see more campaigns talking about like getting out on social media, advertising the work that we do, not as an emergency, not as charity, but that this is when you need help, we're here for you, take advantage of our services. So again, things to consider in terms of operations and wait time. How long do people wait to receive food? Where do they wait? What paperwork do they need when they're signing up? How many days and hours a week are you open? Is it only traditional 9 to 3 kind of hours? Are there some evenings, some weekends to accommodate working families? Is there a comfortable place to sit? How does that feel in that wait time? We're doing good work, but what do you think, folks? Yes, we can do better. The second C that we talk about, so this is a lot about culture. The next is about choice. This is something I feel super passionate about. I have a whole chapter about client choice, and here's why. This is, I think, a gateway to so many other better practices that can take place in a food pantry setting. I've been working with Feeding America at the national office and food banks around the country to gain traction to identify what we mean by choice. Even though we talk a lot about client choice within our network, I think very often we don't quite know what exactly we're talking about. And it is not a bivariate issue. It is not a yes, no, either you offer choice or you don't. I think often in terms of continuums. So I'll give you just the tidbits here that when you think about a traditional food pantry model is where volunteers and staff pre-bag the food. Everyone who comes through the line gets the same identical bag of food. Most of our agencies, food banks and food pantries around the country during COVID had to shift back to this traditional model because of public health precautions. I am excited and really encouraged how many folks are reintroducing choice or offering it for the first time as they come to understand the value of it. So limited choice is where maybe you have the choice between 2 different types of boxes, and then there's maybe a small table of some miscellaneous items or perishables that people can take. Usually with limited choice, it's stuff that otherwise doesn't move as quickly, so volunteers will say, well, let's just let folks take this for free, but it's not necessarily the cream of the crop, if you will. Modified choice is where you may have a menu of options so people can select, but it tends to be fairly generic options. I would like soup, I would like cereal, but you're not determining what type of soup or what type of cereal you'd like. And I don't know about you, but I like certain types of soup more than others. I definitely like certain types of cereals more than others. So with modified, or sometimes it's a matter of a guest can see the food that's available, but they point to it and the volunteer is then bagging that food. With full choice, you take down that wall, the barrier, and guests, neighbors are actively selecting their own food like they would at the grocery store. So they're choosing between chicken noodle soup and tomato soup. They're choosing between Cheerios versus Honey Nut Chex. With COVID, there's so many new innovative ways, even with full choice of doing it online or doing it over the phone where people can select the food that they want. This is really, I think, the value of choice, I just can't state enough how important this is. These are just some benefits of choice. The font here is very small, I'm sorry for those in the back. It increases the dignity of if you're going to get help, and we just heard how humbling and hard that can be, embarrassing. If you go and there's somebody else who's pre-bagging food for you, it is not a very dignified experience when we say, we trust you, we want you to select your food. And let me be clear too, with full choice, that doesn't necessarily mean that people can take as much as they want. Most food pantries that offer full choice may still set limits based on their own supply of food and what they're able to procure from the food bank or other donations. So you can say, you know, if you're a small family, choose 2 items among the soup category. If you're a larger family, choose up to 4. You can still set limits, but you have the choice to be able to select your own food. Most food, the original food bank, the first food bank that was started, was definitely to prevent hunger, but it was also a lot about reducing food waste. And many of us in anti-hunger work, it's kind of that cool dual mission. We don't want food going to waste. We want to make sure people in our community have enough food. But if everybody's getting the same bag of food items, it's very likely that at home that they don't want, that they can't eat. I heard from a gentleman recently who said he already had 6 jars of peanut butter at home. And then going to the food pantry when he really needs food and getting the 7th jar of peanut butter. We mean well, but that's not super helpful. So reducing food waste, there's a huge emphasis on culturally preferred food, culturally meaningful food. If we're expecting that everybody wants the same food items, we're missing out on understanding when you allow folks to choose their food, then you can determine what are the items that are most preferred by your guest. You can be more intentional about getting information from those you're serving of what foods they really want. What are the demands for those food? It places emphasis on the customer and the guest. It reduces that barrier between the giver and receiver. This, to me, is really where the magic happens. So it's great when a food pantry can go from no choice to limited or modified choice, but really you break down the barrier and you allow people to choose their food time and time again. I hear consistently from folks, it is just a better way to provide food. It's better for the staff and volunteers. It is really better for guests. So if you're not on this journey yet, please keep moving on it. Promoting health equity, right? A lot of emphasis on the social determinants of health, all of the underlying challenges with chronic diseases that if you're struggling with food insecurity, you're much more likely to also be struggling with type 2 diabetes, hypertension, obesity, heart disease. It's also about food justice. How do we make it easier for people to make the healthy choices that we know they already want to be making? It's increasing access to healthy perishables in particular. If you have an agency that's open twice a month, it can be hard often to procure and provide a lot of perishable food because if you get a lot of fresh produce, but you're not distributing again for 2 more weeks, it might be harder for you to keep the produce. It's another reason to be open more frequently, more days of the month, etc. There's a lot of emphasis now of, and I know you guys are doing great work here in Wisconsin, of working with local farmers, and particularly BIPOC farmers, of supporting local farms, local produce, making those connections. You guys are really doing stellar work, it seems to me. And creating nudges. How do we set up spaces so that we make the healthy choice the easy choice? There's some cool work that we've done. Several years ago, I would spend time in food pantries, and I would encourage food pantries and food banks to promote healthy food. But I realized that many folks don't necessarily, many of us don't know what healthy food means. So I created a stoplight system called SWAP, Supporting Wellness at Pantries, with strong support from partners at the University of Connecticut at the Rudd Center. I wanted a way that would be really simple, intuitive, transparent, to be able to rank food for those that we should choose often, choose sometimes, choose rarely. So this is our SWAP system. The clicker works better over here. There it is. You may have heard 3 years ago, Healthy Eating Research, which is a program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, they convened an expert panel of nutrition personnel and folks working at food banks. I was really honored to serve on this panel with HER. They wanted to develop a ranking system for the charitable food system and focusing specifically on what would be practical and feasible for food banks and food pantries. And if you're not familiar with this work, I highly recommend you check out HER. This is something that Feeding America has endorsed and is encouraging all food banks in their network to adopt the HER nutrition guidelines. And important to know, our SWAP system is 100% aligned with these HER guidelines. So when we talk about ranking food nutritionally with HER, SWAP is a suite of tools to be able to help you put these guidelines into action. So we have promotional posters in English and Spanish, and there's some food banks and pantries who've been translating them into a variety of other languages, which is really exciting. We have shelf tags, so we can use behavioral economic strategies to nudge and put the green items at aisle and yellow items and then red items. A key point to know, the red items are not about shaming folks and their decisions about food. This is not about judgment. If you just heard what I just mentioned about all the benefits of choice, it's about giving people the dignity to choose their food. It's about education, providing information so people can make healthy choices. We've got a lot of tools available if you're interested, both for food banks and food pantries, to rank your food and get it into your inventory systems like Series or Primaris or NetSuite. And also at the food pantry level, we have healthy food donation lists so that as someone says, hey, we want to do a food drive for you, that's great. You can share a healthy donation list so that you can tailor that message and you don't get 100 bags of miscellaneous items that are often expired and questionable and a lot of work for your volunteers to figure out what the heck to do with. We also have reports and that we can share with your food donors to be able to identify the food donations that are coming in bulk, particularly to food banks, and then nudging those food donors, again thinking upstream, not just at the individual level, but upstream, so that food manufacturers and donors can be making healthier food supplies for us. We're doing good work, but we can do better. This way. So, the role of volunteers, a whole chapter about volunteers. I spoke with somebody last night who said that she had been involved with volunteer services and went to this chapter first, read this chapter first, and then started back at the beginning. We could not do the work that we do if it weren't for volunteers, right? They are the lifeblood that make everything else happen and work, which is amazing. Thank you for anyone here who's a volunteer, who's helping to do this amazing work. We couldn't do it without your support. However, often I fear that we put the needs and the convenience of our volunteers before the needs and opportunities of the people that we're serving. As you think about this paradigm shift, as you think about all these little tidbits and ideas that I'm suggesting, hopefully you're thinking, hey, there's some of these that I want to try. As you're moving paradigm shift, trying new things, That often may mean you need new training and orientation for your volunteers so they can understand, why are we doing this? We've been doing this work for all this time. This works perfectly well. I love my job as a volunteer. I know what to expect. I would encourage you, as you think about these changes that you're hopefully excited to start doing, engage your volunteers. Think about trainings and orientation for them. A simple way to utilize volunteers in terms of creating that customer service experience, that whole guest experience, is have a greeter, someone whose job is simply to be there to greet people, say hello, look them in the eye. Sometimes, if you're struggling with poverty, you can often feel invisible. And it can be very, days are hard. And when someone greets you and says, how are you doing? Sometimes that's like the most important part of the whole experience of coming to get the food or other services. Having name tags. Think about when you go to a restaurant, all those great places you love to shop at, restaurants, when you go to a hotel, people have name tags on. That's really important, so you know, like, if you need help, you know who you're going to. Lots of great work that's happening in trauma-informed care. There are trainings. Leah's Pantry is a wonderful nonprofit in California. They provide training on trauma-informed care, specifically for charitable food programs. Highly recommend. Working with your volunteers, it's a great opportunity to reinforce your mission, your vision for your agency. Make sure that your volunteers espouse those values and are living up to those. And if they're not, if there's someone who is maybe stuck in old ways and is not seeing this new direction that you want to move in, I encourage you to have the guts, and it is hard, to maybe repurpose them. Have them do a different role in the food pantry, in your agency. Because we're doing really good work, but when it comes to volunteers, we can do better. The third C is connection. We know that folks are coming to food pantries and food programs to get food. We know that food is super valuable, but we know the food is just the tip of the iceberg. There are lots of other underlying reasons of why they need help. That slide, defining the problem, helps define our solution. When you think about all the other root causes, all the other underlying issues that folks are dealing with, again, I like my continuums, because hopefully you can place yourself along the continuum and think, okay, if I were to make some subtle changes, how might I move along this continuum? It's not about going from 0 to 60 overnight, it's taking one step, right? So how might we provide additional referrals and additional wraparound services to connect people to other services? So in many traditional food pantries, there's no other information about community resources available. The emphasis is really just about providing food. You can move to passive referrals, where maybe you have information, maybe there's a bulletin board, a table that has information out, but there's no other additional referral or follow-up. When you provide a warm referral, this is where you have staff and volunteers who are very knowledgeable about other community resources, or maybe even just starting with a handful of other resources in the community. Utility assistance, legal assistance, maybe there's a GED program that you can recommend. Being knowledgeable about a few other community resources. And then providing a warm referral, letting folks know here's something that they're looking for, providing that referral with some kind of follow-up. The next time they come in, hey, did you make that phone call? How did that go? Did you enroll in that program? If not, was it that they tried calling and they just kept getting put on hold? Or was it they're just not quite ready for that referral yet? That's okay, doing that follow-up. Maybe you invite and you host some other community agencies to come to your program so that they can help enroll people in services. It doesn't mean you and your agency needs to be an expert on all of these other community resources, but it's helpful if you know what else is available in your community so you can refer folks. And then as we think along the continuum, services, this is where you're not only providing warm referrals with some follow-up, maybe you're hosting programs, workshops, classes on site, and you're hosting folks on site to provide those wraparound services. Designating a small area in your agency that has a computer, a printer, where people can look at additional services. So it makes it easier for people to make those connections. So you're not saying, here's an opportunity, now you need to take a bus across town and go to this program, and then you're going to need to go to this other day to this other service. I love that you're nodding your head. This is resonating, right? Think about different ways that you can connect these dots. And then, when you think about putting all of these different pieces together, towards the end of the book, I'd say, okay, take one step, think about different ways that you can take action if you want to put them all together. It's what I refer to as a community food hub, or an anchor organization that's in the community that is not only providing food with choice, with nutritious, healthy food, but other partnerships and wraparound services. These are just examples of the kinds of services that we can co-locate and have available so that when people come to get food, they leave with so much more. Think about reducing the stigma so that it's not as embarrassing. You're going to get food, you're also going to receive tax prep information, housing assistance, childcare assistance, you're working on your resume, you're meeting with folks. It is a space, it's a community hub where you feel more empowered to make changes in your life. When we do this kind of work in creating the space for wraparound services, then it creates an opportunity. Ooh, we're almost there, not there yet. Hold up. Hold up. Clicking. Oh, there we go. To advocate for bigger systems change. Advocacy doesn't happen overnight. I mean, we have advocacy organizations that have nothing to do with charitable food, but when we try to co-locate and partner with others and listen to the people in our community about their concerns, their goals, their hopes, then we can create that time and space to engage, to hear about the situations that are going on, typically not just for one individual, but for what's happening within the community. So it's not that just one person needs help with housing or utility assistance. Usually that's a community issue. So then how do we take that information to advocate on behalf of those that we serve for bigger systems change? There's a lot of opportunities for advisory groups, community advocacy groups, to build champions so that folks can feel empowered to advocate for themselves, for their communities. We can raise collective voices to do this, not just individually. Think of the power of this room. Think of the power of the network that you have here, Feeding Wisconsin, right? Think about if we all raise our collective voices on issues. Think of the power that we might have. I think so often we get stuck in our own silos, or just that we're so busy doing our immediate work that we don't always raise our head to say, hey, imagine the power of the policies that we could change, the legislative action that we could take if we work collectively. This is also a really big opportunity and a responsibility to increase awareness of the structural inequities that are taking place. I was in the breakout session just before this, and I won't get the names right, but of talking about the inequities in Black and brown communities, and how when we know that these inequities exist, and that it helps explain why consistently we know that people of color have the highest rates of food insecurity, that have the highest rates of chronic diseases, that we're the first folks to lose their jobs, that are more at risk for getting COVID. We know these things. Well, then we need to address it and raise our voices bigger, louder. This is an incredible opportunity. Since COVID, since the murder of George Floyd, people are listening and paying attention. We need to keep that energy up and continuing to raise awareness for this in the work that we do, having calls to action. We're doing good work, folks, but tell me what? We can do better. So how will you reinvent the way that you tackle hunger? I hope that you feel inspired by some of these messages. I hope that you are taking with you some action steps that you're going to bring back to your teams, back to your organizations, your community, and you've got another day and a half here. I hope that you brainstorm together to share ideas and resources and figure out how do you partner with so many other folks that are already here. Take the time and energy to do this while you're here. And it really is about, this work is hard, it's big. Thinking about tackling systemic inequalities that have existed for centuries is hard, it's intimidating, but just take one step. Figure out your role. What is the one thing that you can do? All of those steps make a difference. And this work, this paradigm shift, it's happening. It's happening. And then share it with me. Let me know what you're doing, because I want to hear about it. If not now, gosh, when? We have this extraordinary time. They are aware of food insecurity. We have resources coming our way. This is an incredible opportunity and responsibility. And if not you, who's going to do it, right? We have this time now. So I thank you so much. Here's all my information. You can get in touch with me. And I believe we're going to be sharing these slides, so you'll have all this available to you. Reach out. I'm not on social media a ton, but I try to be, so tag me. I would love it if you tag me on social media or send me an email. Tell me the action step that you're taking. Let me know the things that have inspired you. In many ways, I think this is kind of my research for book number 2, perhaps. So thank you so much, and I know we now want to have time for questions, and I'd love to hear from you, so thank you.